good evening if you're in New Zealand, Australia, and this side of the world where I'm based. Good whatever other time in between afternoon, I guess. And good morning to the people that are joining us from Europe. If you're on Zoom, please take the poll to tell us where you are so that we can adjust the timing at which we run these things. There is we're broadcasting to YouTube, so if you don't want to be on camera, turn your camera off. We're paying attention to YouTube chats and Zoom chats. And very soon, Kenny will start.
Yeah, I'll just start sharing my screen and thank you for the introduction. And then we can just start, right?
Yeah, I do have a very small thing for which is kind of especially for the people that are in New Zealand and Australia. I wanted to highlight a conference that is upcoming in November the 8th. Right?
Yeah, do you want to share something about that?
I would like to share it. I'll have a little thing after you finish so that people can come back to it. But this is a conference called ADA Conf. It's in Melbourne on the 8th of November. So it's called ADA as in ADA. So adaconf.org, the 8th of November in Melbourne. Check it out. It's a community organized conference. And I think it's going to be great. I'm a slightly tiny bit biased because I'm going to be speaking there. But I can see all the work they're putting on making this a great conference. Also wanted to let people know we're running a book club on facilitating software architecture with virtual DDD. So if you want to join us, we run every other Tuesday. I think that's all the announcements for now.
Good.
And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Kenny Baas-Schwegler, who is I'm going to let you introduce yourself about what you do, but I think it's a great honor to host you, and it's going to be great fun to learn everything you have to tell us about domain-driven design and collaborative software design.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Andrea. So, well, I'm actually also one of the organizers, but this is the first session I actually not host, but do something, I think. If I can remember, we've been running for 5 years, I guess. But yeah, I thought with you moving, it was time maybe to do some introduction to domain-driven design and collaborative software design so people can rewatch this maybe later or ask questions now about what does domain-driven design actually is. And a big part of it is collaborative software design, which I'm a bit biased to because together with Evelyn and Hien, I wrote a book about. But let's jump a bit in. A lot of this is I give a lot of training about domain-driven design, and a lot of this is in my training. So normally in my training, I ask people, what's your current architecture about? And I let them drag one of these dots around, but you can also type in the chat what's your current architecture you're working on? Is it a monolithic architecture? And with monolith, I don't mean big ball of mud because that's on top. Or is it more a distributed monolith, or is it really a microservices architecture? So I'm curious what. So write in the chat if you can. What's your current architecture about? If I would describe it myself at this moment, there is one monolith, and they're mostly working. I guess somewhere here, and I've worked on all 4 of these, by the way. Yeah, so I see some microservices, some monoliths, plus lots of microservices, distributed big ball of mud. So the difference really is that a distributed big ball of mud or a distributed monolith is really a monolith cut into objects and made into separate services. So it's not really microservices. And a big ball of mud is a monolith without clear boundaries. So it's the reverse, right? You're still in a single unit of deployment, but there's no clear boundaries and to what we're solving. So good. There's a lot of these things. So going to domain-driven design, why I asked it is when Eric Evans wrote the book, which is around the 2000s area. I'm not really sure when he did that. There wasn't really, well, there might be microservices, but it was really expensive back then. But he was working with this team, and I call it the trading engineering team. I'm not sure if it was that team, but he was working with one team, and they were working on this, what we thought was a monolithic application. And this trading engineering thing was really good. They went really fast, and then at some point he needed to go to production. And then he got blocked by the other team. So there was this monolithic application with one big model inside and a database, right? So you can say it's sort of like a big ball of mud. And this is the reason Eric Evans started writing domain-driven design and started thinking, how can I solve this? Because I can clearly not split up the monolithic application. That will be too expensive. So I need to do something within the monolithic architecture to do that. And what he observed is that the design, which in this case, design also includes the two teams, but also the way that what they're solving, or some central part of it does not map to the domain model. So they had one model in that monolithic application, but they had two teams. And maybe there were more teams. I'm not clear what that was, but it could be more teams as well. It doesn't matter. But there was one model, and there were several parts of the design that needs to be implemented. And that model is of little value, right? The correctness of the software is suspect because you're not sure if that model actually solves the problem. It solves many problems in an ambiguous way. So that's where Eric Evans thought, how could we change that? And the thing is, when people start with domain-driven design, they're like, do we really need to do software design? Well, clearly, one thing, and this example shows it, there's always a design. And this is a Douglas Martin quote. There's questions about whether design is necessary or affordable. It's quite beside the point, as you can show in that earlier example, design is inevitable. The alternative to good design is bad design, not no design at all. Here you see a picture from the Netherlands. We call this an elephant pad in the Netherlands. But here you can see that someone clearly designed this road to be for people walking only, and thought, how can I block the scooters and especially the bicycle people going there? Well, they put these two rails on the way, but they didn't account for the field on the left side. So that created what we call in Dutch an elephant pad, which is not an English word, but maybe it should become an English word as well, an elephant pad, because I like the words. It's the shortest path, or it's the... and as you can see, that's now part of the design. So there's always a design. This is a design as well. Even though we wasn't explicit about the design, it got designed by the people. And that's it, right? It's in the end, it's a bad design. So there's always a design. Now, when we design in software, and this is, by the way, if you don't follow Ruth Malan, you should. She's one of the pioneers, in my opinion, of architecture and software architecture. She has a vast knowledge. But she has this very interesting thing called, or showed or linked to the incoherency penalty. And when we do design as a software team or as doing software, there's this thing called the incoherency penalty. And that's whatever time the team members spent reestablishing a common view of the universe. That's the incoherency penalty. And you might be able to think about this yourself, right? If you're in a group and you're talking about certain concepts, first you need to agree what these concepts are. First you thought, do you mean this or do you mean that? That's the incoherency penalty, right? We need to re-establish a common view of the universe. Also, maybe you've ever written software in a team before. You did branching. You write on your branch, someone else wrote on their branch. They're putting a PR out. You're reading that PR and you're like, what? This is not what we agreed upon. That's an incoherency penalty. Right? And this is what we're dealing with constantly when we're designing, when we're trying to design software models. And that's the thing that domain-driven design, in my essence, starts to tackle. And not only between software developers, between any designer. And in my opinion, anyone who communicates in an organization is a software designer, because all communication impacts the software design. That's what Conway's law is all about. And so to communicate effectively, that code must be based on the same language used to write the requirements, the same language that the developers speak with each other and with the domain experts, right? So that's for me, this is one of the most important quotes in domain-driven design, right? We want to continuously battle that incoherency penalty within domain-driven design. And that's hard because people are people and we change language quite fast. We change word quite fast. There's a lot of ambiguity, and I will touch upon that later. But for me, one of the essence thing, and there's more, of course, because it's about software design. In essence, it's to communicate effectively. That's what domain-driven design in one point tries to solve. And Eric Evans created this pattern called, people might be aware of it, the ubiquitous language. It's interesting, the ubiquitous language is a structure around the domain model and used by all the team members to connect all activity with the team, with the software. And it's a language that's consistent and not ambiguous. The only problem is if I write ubiquitous, it becomes very ambiguous because I cannot write it correctly always. I need someone to fix that for me. But yeah, a ubiquitous language is a consistent language, so it's not ambiguous. Words don't have several meanings, or concepts don't have several meanings. And it's a language structure around the domain model. And this is an essential part in domain-driven design, right? The word domain is it. But the word domain model is often confused as well. So let's jump a little bit into what is a domain model. So here's a map. Question, what's wrong with this map? So please type in the chat and ask me and tell me who knows what's wrong with this map. And by the way, this example comes from Eric Evans himself in his talks, and I think it's still the best example to explain a domain. But let me know, what do you think? What's wrong with this map? Just type in the chat if you can. It's flat. Yeah, the globe, it's flat. Proportions, well, you know, if we have a map of the world or a real life model of the world, that's the world, right? We don't need that. Color coding, yeah, true. Distance not rightly represented. Yeah, you can say that. It's a sphere flattened. Yeah, so the thing is, the main thing that's wrong with this map is the proportions. I think someone mentioned that, yeah. And the proportion is Greenland looks really like 80% of what Africa is. But if you're looking at this map, and Greenland is somewhere here on top, but as you can see, the differences between the maps, right? Africa is a lot larger, and for instance, Russia is a lot smaller. So here the proportions are a bit better. So this is another map and another model. So if you want to get better proportions, you need, and maybe the proportions are off here because the map is off, but I hope you understand that there's a different map for a different problem. But now the question is why, I guess everyone's familiar with this map mostly, right? Well, I grew up in classrooms learning this map, but why do they teach this map? Does anyone know why this map was created? I'll wait for the chat group to come alive. So anyone know why we're all familiar mostly with this one? Angles. Yeah, you can say that. Naval navigation, yes. So maybe someone know already. Not a lot of people know, but if you've seen Eric Evans' talk, this is straight from his talks. It can stick on a wall, yes. But actually, it's the naval navigation, right? There's this nowadays Belgium guy called Mercator. He was living around Bruges, Brugge, as we call it in Northern Dutch. And this person created the Mercator projection for simply one reason, and that's for naval navigation. So on the Mercator projection, you can draw a line from one point on the map to another point on the map, and you can follow that direction, and you get roughly at the position where you are, which on a globe doesn't work. So this map was created to solving a specific problem. Now, Eric Evans explains this in his talk as well, and why? Because let's think about creating a software for this map, right? For naval navigation. We call it naval navigation map. And it creates from point A to point B. You can put it in and it will give you there. It will get you there. Now on this map, some person comes in and he says, hey, that's nice. That's neat, a naval navigation system. But the sizes of the countries are not correct. Can we put the correct sizes of the countries in this map? And then the answer is sure we can. We can make some exceptions in the code because we're software developers and engineers. We can do that. The problem is dilutes the model, right? So as in this, as I showed you before, right? Two purposes, two different maps. And that's also what we try to do, or what we do in domain-driven design, right? Because the model is a simplified representation of a thing or phenomenon that intentionally invades in certain aspects while ignoring others. It's an abstraction with a specific use in mind, right? So if you want to travel the ocean, we have the Mercator map. If you want to do something else, you need another map. The same goes within domain-driven design. If you want to solve one business problem, you use one model. If you solve another business problem, you solve another. You create another model. That's the basic thing that we talk about a domain model is. And by the way, I was recently talking about Root. This is Rebecca. If you don't know Rebecca, also for me, she's also very much a pioneer in software design. You should follow her. She has vast knowledge and she wrote a couple of very good books, and she's the inventor of the DD meme. She started it all with responsibility-driven design. And that was before domain-driven design. Got it. So please follow her. But the thing is, a model is an abstraction with a specific use in mind. And that's very important if we talk about domain-driven design. The model is for a specific use, right? So that specific use in solving business problems. So business problems are the various needs of our users and stakeholders. Stakeholders are individuals or groups either within or outside the organization who are invested in the outcome of solving these business problems. Their needs can range from purposes, objectives, to specific goals, tasks, customers, and user journey, business process constraints, and any challenge they face. So a question to you again. How would you discover business problem at this moment? So please write in the chat. Usually I have some stickies here, but the chat's been working great so far. So what are you using to discover business problems at this moment? I'm curious. Talk to domain experts, great. Event storming, customers, listen to users. Yeah, all great answers. Eyeballs, any means necessary. Yeah. Good. So there's some any tools people use. I see event storming popping up. Read old documentation. Yeah. Yeah, so for domain-driven design, we want to find the business problems, right? Because the business model will turn into these models. Boxes, arrows, and stickies. Great. So I have this great model by Indy Young. And for me, it explains in domain-driven design, there's a lot of confusion about the word problem and solution space. And this is the best. And it's not that important to go into depth here, but what I want to show you here is this model by Indy Young. And she explains that people have problems, or they address the purpose with a variety tool. That's the problem space. So on the left side here, people with their purpose, right? So maintain a single source of knowledge. So she's a user researcher nowadays. Give a lot of talk about that and about listening. But on the left side, you actually have people with their real problems. And I'm going to get to you what's the difference. From these problems, we create products. Those products gets then later developed by the team. What we usually see is that software design already starts here, right? To listening, developing empathy, and finding patterns of what are the user's problems. Over here, we have our product and we have our development. Usually, we as a team or as software development teams, we sit somewhere around here. And we're not so much involved here. Now, if you read earlier versions of domain-driven design books, they talk about problem and solution space. Their problem space mostly describe this space. Yeah. And to be honest, this over here is not really a problem space. Why? Let's say you want to go to the cinema. We're going to talk a little bit more about the cinema later on, but I'm going to prime you there already. Let's say you want to go to the cinema and you want to get some tickets for a certain movie. I've been to Deadpool recently. I go to the software, I go in, and I need to select my seat. Now, that thing, selecting a seat, is over here. Yeah? It's not over here because I, as a customer, I don't have the need to select a seat. My need is higher. I want to have a good movie experience. So that means part of my purpose is to get good seats in the cinema, right? And that sits here. Now, the way the cinema or the movie theater solve that is to provide me an app where I can pick my own seats, but with a few constraints. Why did they do that? Is if everyone would just pick their own seats, the cinema theater won't be filled up. They will make less money. So the cinema also have their own purpose. And these purposes had combined into something called the product, which is the ticket reservation. Right? And usually from a domain-driven design perspective, we sit here, right? Someone comes in and, well, I have this thing and you need to solve, and you need to implement this thing called ticket reservation. But ticket reservation is not the problem. It's actually already a solution. And this is very important when you want to design your bounded context, because a bounded context is a model for a specific purpose. If we take the purpose here, it might be the incorrect purpose, right? We want to be moved more towards this real problem space in the Young talks about, right? So we want to be involved as soon as possible in that discovery of problems. So because the thing is, if we sit over here as a team, right, but things are already happening over here, what's going on is this funny movie. Of course, this is staged, but this is what happens in real life as well, right? So there are some user researchers that does the user research. Then we have a user designer and an architect that they're architecting the product and the service. And finally, they say, okay, here's a user story. As a person, I want the customer to be able to buy 3 tickets and select their seats, right? That's what you get as user story as, but that's already a solution. And what's happening is this thing we call the telephone game. And here you can see it being in a funny way depict how that works. But a telephone game is I say something to you, you say something to the next person, you say something to the next person. And what happens in the end is shit comes out, right? And the thing here is, and this is the important part, because this is what Alberto Brondolini says, right? It is not the domain expert knowledge that goes to production, it's the assumption of the developer that goes to production. And why this is important is if we as software designer don't know the real intent of our users, we definitely going to build the wrong abstraction. All abstractions are false, but we want to get the best possible abstraction, best possible domain model. So that's why it's not the domain expert knowledge. So what can we do? Well, we can do collaborative modeling, and collaborative modeling is a visualization technique. And this is the book that I'm writing with Evelyn and Gien, right? And we say collaborative modeling is a visualization technique. So that's step 1. It's a visualization technique to analyze complex and conflict-laden decision-making processes, which means those are the ones that are domain-driven design is there to tackle complex problems. If it's an easy problem, you probably can solve it very easy. Usually in software nowadays, we're dealing with complex problems, and that makes the design of the solution also complex, and especially conflict-laden, because there's if you can imagine, if there's several stakeholders in your group, it can become very conflict-laden because they might have different counter things. So let's go back to that cinema example. The customer journey person is there to say, well, the customer, we need to be customer-centric, right? We need to give the customer we need to be able to make sure they sit in the correct spot in the cinema. But then a business person says, yeah, but we also need to fill that cinema, right? That's conflict because they have counter goals to take care of. So when you put these people into a room together and start collaborative modeling, it becomes a conflict-laden decision-making process. And that's the all relevant stakeholders. To design this process, we need both of these people here, both the people who understand or know the user correctly. Preferably, we as engineers already been part of that discovery, and put the decision making there. Who can actually decide? There's always one person who can decide, and that's the person who holds the money and the budgets usually. So, and that's why we want, through that, create a shared understanding, because that shared understanding that will we can create together domain models. Yeah. So one of the one of the most popularized techniques, Eric Evans himself didn't really describe types of techniques to do collaborative modeling. He also mostly talked to domain experts, did some context mapping. Later on, Alberto Brandolini came in and says, well, there's this, he tried to experiment with something called EventStorming one day. He was trying to explain something, and he did that through domain events, which already, after the domain-driven design book, Greg Young came with the concept of domain events, and then Alberto started modeling with this concept of domain events and created this event storming. If you read his book, there's 3 types of event storming. There's the big picture event storming, which is really to model and discover an entire business line with 15 to 70 people to create common understanding, massive learning, trigger long-awaited conversation, and reach a consensus. Is not what you want in a big picture event storming. When we go to process modeling and software design, we're going to go more towards 5 to 10 people, more on a team level, maybe something above there. And we try to model the as is towards the to be and towards software design. So that's important to understand. Usually when you see people talk about event storming, it's usually in the software design space where you use something called aggregate modeling. But actually, we want to start someone in the process modeling phase or the big picture stage, even. Yeah. And here's another view of how that would look, right? You can have an enterprise or a domain scope. You do big picture event storming. You can do it as is with a little bit to be. When you go down more towards application scope or team scope, domain scope, you can do more process modeling. And towards a team, you can start going towards software design. So these are the 3 types of event storming Alberto talks about. You can use event storming for many other reasons. As long as there's a process, you can actually do event storming. Paul Reiner came with team flow event storming, where you can actually model out your software delivery process of your team. I actually done this myself as well to model my own wedding. Right, so I sat 9 months in front of my wedding with my soon-to-be parents-in-law and the siblings of my wife, and I rolled down the space and I said, "What needs to be done to make this wedding a success?" So as long as there's a process or a planning, you can do event storming, and I can show you that. And I'm gonna show you that in a few moments. So all you need to do event storming is the modeling surface. Right? So you need to have a modeling surface. You need to have a visible legend, preferably. Some paper roles when you do it physically. Today I'm giving this talk through Miro board, so we have an infinite space. Some sticky notes and markers. And all we need to get started is this orange sticky called the a domain event. Now, as I said, you can do a lot of domain or you can use event storming for a lot of processes. Here, I showed you a little bit of the story of Cinderella, right? Cinderella lost her shoes, clock ticked 12, Prince found the shoes. So these are domain events, right? They're business relevant, or they're relevant for the story. So I wouldn't expect any technical things here. And they're a verb at past tense because they things that happens, and they're relevant for our domain experts. So if we model out the Cinderella process, the Cinderella lost her shoes, clock ticked 12, Prince found the shoe, and then let's get another one here that says stepsister got off her, and I cannot write toes, but something like that. And then people say, that's not really in the Cinderella story. Well, it's not, but it is. this is the Brother Grimm story. Which one are we modeling? So I can add these hotspots in there because I said stepsister, and that's what the stepsister cut off her toes. There we go. That's the Brothers Grimm story. When you do event storming with many people and many people put on events, these things start popping out, right? So the assumptions of the story, the counter things are stopping to pop out. Now let's see how that works. I got a little bit of an event storming canvas here, and show me in the chat what are some domain events for trying to select or buy tickets for a movie theater. So at least I could say number of tickets selected. Right, let's start with that. Number of tickets selected, that sits somewhere in the start. Anyone else? Any domain events that you can think of? That will happen when you want to tickets paid. Yeah, so I would say tickets are paid somewhere here. So I say reserve seats. So seats are reserved, right? They're past tense, so we try to keep it in past tense. Film got selected. Discount. Oh, someone needed to mention discounts again. Those are a very hard problem. Discount got applied. Yeah. Anything else? Tickets delivered. Tickets are delivered. And seats are locked. Yeah, so now is the interesting thing. So what we can do now is let's say you do this in real life, right? What happens is that anyone in the team I asked to do the same thing as you did, right? Everyone will put on their events. And you can see already some discrepancies if I put it this way, right? Because film got selected. Probably what we can say is film got selected. That sits probably before the number of tickets got selected, right? We first want to select, we first film got selected, then number of tickets. Then we do seats are reserved, or discount got applied. Well, I think discounts are applied is later. Seats are locked. Well, isn't this the same or not? Is this the same or not, right? I need to go into a conversation with you. There's a chat group, so I cannot go inside. But what does lock mean and what does reserve mean? Exactly, I see it in the chat. And that's a good question. We usually with event storming, we can now talk about that, right? What do we mean with reserved? What do we mean with locked? And that's an important part of domain-driven design, the language. Because that's, as you can mention, what Eric Evans says, right? Communication, ubiquitous language. We try to keep that coherent. And if reserved and locked are very ambiguous, they might seem ambiguous. Maybe we mean the same thing. Maybe we mean different things. What do we mean? Now we make it explicit, right? Yeah. Discount got applied. Tickets are paid. Tickets are delivered. There's much more here. And normally I would invite everyone on the board and to speak up. But this is just a small presentation to show you very simple how event storming in the basis work. Now there's more to event storming, right? There's more cards. For instance, when seats get reserved, there might be a constraint here. And that constraint might be, well, I want to have one reservation per seat, right? We don't want to give out more reservations. We don't want to give out a seat multiple times. So that might be a good one. And maybe as soon as we reserve the seat, and I put this thing called a policy in event storming, seats are reserved. What we then want is when seats are reserved, we enter what's something called the cancellation policy, meaning after 50 minutes, seats got canceled. And I need to say after 50 minutes not paid, seats got canceled, right? So that's we can capture that with this. And there's a little bit more to it. This is not an event storming exercise, but I'll show you the last two quickly. So there might be a command sitting in front of here, which is called reserve seats. And there might be a green sticky that also, and this is a lot nicer on Miro, I can tell you, than something else. Then for instance in physical way, this is the bonus of Miro. But here we can say reserved seats. So this is information, right? Reserved seat, countdown timer, and 3 seats. So some person who reserved the seats can still change seats here. And this is what we show to the movie visitor, right? And a movie visitor can now, for instance, change seats, right? So this is how event storming works, and quickly we can, together with stakeholders, find out what are their concerns, what are their problems we try to solve, what are their constraints that needs to be there, and why are they there, right? Yeah, and we can, that way event storming is very powerful, because as you can see, I slowly build it up. I started with the domain event. In theory, most people, a lot of people can understand this within 10 minutes, what a domain event is, and start collaborating together, right? It's not what we call something that's, if you do things like UML or Archimate, there's a whole framework and legends you need to know and to understand before you're able to share your thoughts on it. So within collaborative modeling, we try to keep things very simple so that we can collaborate. That's the focus, together and visualize, right? So that's always the focus of collaborative modeling. Now, what we do, we use this collaborative modeling for something called domain modeling. And domain modeling is to find out within domain-driven design, what are our domains and what are our subdomains? And the way I describe this is, okay, I've captured the journey, what someone wants, I captured the process, what domains can be there? And a domain is really about grouping concepts. It's about a sphere of knowledge, influence, or activity. It's the area of interest or area which a person has control of. And we call I talked about the problem space before. So this is a domain, right? There's confusion to what a domain is. A domain is different than a domain model, by the way. So a domain means, where is the sphere of knowledge? Where is that? Where can we find a subdomain or something, right? The metaphor I usually describe this is similar to a grocery shop, right? In a grocery shop, we have the cleaning aisle, right, for the cleaning products, and the problem we solve there is cleaning. We have the vegetable aisle, and we have the fruit aisle. Now, if I ask you, someone needs to start cooking with tomatoes, where would you put that? Probably people will say it's the vegetable aisle, right? Well, in a grocery shop, in this context, tomato is a vegetable. If you go to biology, it's actually a fruit. So we're trying to group the concept and see where do they belong. Now, Romeo had this fun metaphor. He says in the context of biology, a tomato is a fruit. In the context of grocery shop, it's a vegetable. In the concept of feedback, or in theater, it's a feedback, right? So you throw tomatoes at the audience. So depending on the context, depending on the knowledge or the context, a object means you do different things with the object. In a grocery shop, that tomato will come back in different ways as well, because some aisles have like an Italian aisle, right? And there you have like passata, which is used to cook pasta with. That's still a tomato, maybe with some more ingredients inside, but the tomato is still there. So we don't focus on objects. We really focus on the behavior, the intent, and the purpose of it, right? And based on that, a tomato can come back several times in different mini domains. So what we're looking for in the domains is, what are we solving in the domain, right? So we're using that event storming to find these domains, and from there create these bounded contexts, right? We use design activity. So we go from process modeling to software design, and we try to create bounded contexts. And bounded contexts are, in essence, a model to solve a specific problem. So within domains, we look for what are the problems, and we categorize these problems. Italian cooking, for instance, or vegetables. So people want to cook with vegetables. That's a subdomain. And the bounded contexts are the several products you can find in a grocery shop. This is very simplistic, by the way, because a grocery shop is not that complex. Maybe it's even complicated. But in essence, that metaphor still holds, right? So from these domains, we try to see what are their problems, and we try to create product for these problems, right? And I'm going to show you a little bit later on how that works. Now, EventStorming is not the only tool out there to do collaborative modeling. The goal of collaborative modeling is always to start understanding the problem, right? And we have several of these tools. Me, together with two friends, created a community visual collaboration tools. It's been a bit docile lately, but there's still a lot of tools in there and how people applied it. But you have domain storytelling. EventStorming, as you can see, is very good at multiple storylines, but sometimes domain experts get really overwhelmed about what that sticky is. I love domain story just as much. I both use them together at my clients, and domain storytelling is focused on the story and uses icons to do that. Now we have wordly mapping, we have business model canvas, we have example mapping, we have core domain charts, context mapping, bounded context canvas, and we have many more of these visual collaboration tools. The goal of a visual collaboration tool is collaboration. So it needs to be very easy for people to use. Yes, thank you, Benjamin. I will be there next year in Como Camp. There will be a collaborative modeling open space next year in Vienna. And it's comocamp.org. I'll be there as well. So hope to see you. Last year I couldn't join, unfortunately. I was very sad about that, but next year I will be there. So there are many tools out there. Don't get stuck on one tool. We start with EventStorming. That was one of the earlier tools in the domain-driven design community. It's not the only tool. Pick the one that works for you and your stakeholders. That's always the goal, right? The tool is there to solve the problem. The problem is collaborative modeling. How can we discover visually what the problem is that we're trying to solve and create models together? Yeah. So going back to communicating effectively, right? We all do this, and later on you already saw what's happening, right? Is it reserved or is it locked? What do we actually mean by that? So Eric Evans explains this quote I tell you before: to communicate effectively, the code must be based on the same language, used to write the requirements, the same language that the developers speak with each other and with the domain experts, right? So communication is very important here. But what do we mean with this? I really find this funny. This is some non-British speaking, non-native British speaking people who watched the Great British Bake Off, and they had some questions about the words that's been used. So things like, what's a biscuit, right? Is a biscuit a cookie, right? Or not? Or what do you mean with stodgy? Or what do you mean? So language is very fluid, right? The British language, even within the UK, or even within England and Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland, and you have different dialects that has word that has different meanings. Same goes for the Netherlands. And that's the thing that people discovered watching the Great British Bake Off, right? Because here you see, I still don't have a firm handle on what the Brits mean when they say pudding. Yeah, so Ireland as well, right? Always also different English, but I guess you're in New Zealand now, so you find out new words as well, Andrea. That's different from the Irish one. But pudding, and Eric Evans also tells the story of going to his British friend that says, do you want pudding? And in the Netherlands, we also have the word pudding, by the way. It's called pudding, and it's the jelly thing, right? In most parts of Britain, pudding means dessert. So here you can see ambiguity, and this does not help when we try to create software. Now, I could accommodate very quickly between a pudding and something as a dessert or a cake, but software cannot do that, right? If software expects a pudding, it doesn't accept pie or cake or anything, right? So software is a bit harder. So Language is ambiguous, and that's something we have to deal with as software developers. And there's two types of ambiguity here. Mostly, I'm not an expert, but I always find this thing funny, right? We have lexical ambiguity. It's the presence of two or more meanings within a single word. Or we have the syntactic one, is that within a single sentence or a sequence of words. And this is what we have to deal with when we do collaborative modeling. There's these many words that mean different things. So during collaborative modeling, we also want to decide on what word are we gonna use? Yeah, so is it reserved or is it locked? Or are they actually different concept? And if they're different concept, and I think they're the same concept, should we use different words for that to make it explicit that there really are two different concepts there, right? Because else you can see, I saw her duck. If it's two different concepts, that's not what we want. We want to be explicit. Because language is very fluid and business language is very fluid. It's subject to the winds of people. It evolves. Let's say someone else from the same business joins your company. Within a few weeks, there will be new words. That's how language goes, right? Language changes to accommodate new users, while the older users resist and complain. You can see this every year. Happening when new words come out in the dictionary. That's always a fun thing to see. People start whining again. Why should we have that? So that's what we have to deal with. And that's why Eric Evan created this concept called the bounded context pattern, right? The bounded context pattern is a linguistic pattern. It's a language boundary where your users and stakeholders, together with other people possibly involved in designing and building software, test the team, the code, they all speak in that same language. Yeah? That unit of consistent language. And that's actually the ubiquitous language, right? So the ubiquitous language is not for your entire domain, for your entire company. It's for a bounded context. It's for one thing. And what's furthermore in that bounded context is what we talked about. It's that model, right? So we design a consistent language around a domain model. And that's the domain model. Yeah, so we have a domain, which is a sphere of knowledge. In the domain, there's a lot of problems. There might be one problem, there might be more problems. We design a specific language to tackle that problem, and we design a model for that problem. This is not technical. The bounded context is not technical. What we do with that language and that model, we create code, and we represent that in code. So the code is a representation of the model. The code is not the model. Yeah, so the model is there to streamline communication. So we all talk in that same domain model. People are aware that when you step inside this domain model, a word has this meaning. When I go to another domain model and boundary, a word can mean a different thing because we solve a different problem. Yeah, and it's the same with the tomato, right? If it's in an Italian part, it's a different thing, the tomato, than in the other part of the aisle. That's how you can see it. It's for a specific purpose. So in one aisle, it's for solving Italian dishes. In another aisle, we might have Turkish dishes, which also have some sort of passata, but it's a different passata, right? Both have the word tomato, puree, but both are different. Both is a different mixture. Both have different behavior. And that's how you can see the bounded context pattern as well. Okay, so how do we design these bounded contexts? Well, one thing before I say that's the most important thing. On the left side, usually what happens is that teams and stakeholders, they communicate on application and deployment boundary, right? Going back to the Mercator version, let's say we have a system that has like the countries in them, the cities in them, and they say, oh, there's already countries and cities in them. Oh, can you make them to correct size? That's usually how stakeholders and team talk about software. What we want to do is talk in terms of bounded context. So we want to have a stakeholder and team talk in terms of bounded context. Then we as software engineers can use that model to implement that in software. So we, as software developers, decide then, should it be two bounded contexts in one monolith? right? These are strategic monoliths. Or should one bounded context go to one boundary, which is already usually called a microservices architecture? Or should I split the bounded context up in two application boundaries? Please don't do that, preferably, because you make it awfully more complex. I like this one, but I usually start with the monolithic application, because the only reason you should move towards microservice, well, there's many reasons, but if you're on one team working several bounded contexts in one application boundary, it doesn't matter if you're with one team, so it's not about autonomy anymore. But if you have several teams working on a bounded context, and that's not depicted here, let's say this team owns this one and this doesn't own that one. Now you might have a reason to go to a new towards this part. That's one reason. The other reason is scalability, or all the architectural characteristics, right? Some people call it non-functionals. I don't like that. I like the architectural characteristics. Architectural characteristics can push you in this direction. Barry O'Reilly has a very interesting residuality theory where you can actually scientifically see, do I need to go move towards that? Yeah, but the goal is these bounded contexts. There we communicate in with our stakeholders. It's not a technical pattern, it's a linguistic boundary, right? So communication goes in here. We decide how we implement that in software based on that function. One thing though, one bounded context is one team. One team can have multiple bounded contexts, but a bounded context cannot have multiple teams, preferably. That's what I'm depicted here. That's a very important part. If you do, language start to become ambiguous again because of Conway's law. So one thing I need to clear up here as well is that the domain model will be typically derived from the domain expert's own jargon, but will have been cleaned up to have sharper, narrower definitions. Yeah, so yes, we use the language the domain expert used, but we clean it up. We add new concepts where needed. We change it, and we design that together. Now, quickly, because I see, I'm already 50 minutes in. That's goes faster than I expected. Let's say this is a basic event storming, and it's still simplistic, by the way. Real event storming is bigger, but let's say this is the event storming. We can actually start decomposing and distilling with event storming. We can say, okay, let's look for purposes in this thing. So over here, website open, view selected. So this is so we can actually say here. Finding movies, right? And we can say, well, this might be a boundary. So maybe this is a subdomain or a bounded context. We're not sure yet. It's emerging. And then we can say, well, here we're actually selecting tickets. Okay, let's start with that. The way you want to do this is start with some boundaries and start iterating, right? So I have these two. When you look at it here, it's a bit more depicted in our book. We go through all these stages and we say, find the natural boundaries. Okay, we have movie scheduling and we have ticketing purchasing. I actually see a typo here. That's good to know. Right? And then we start to iterate. This is not the best model yet. You want to find out different models to do that, but I'm just going into the basics of how do we find these bounded contexts. Well, we might say external system communicates happens in its own bounded context. So we get payments out because that's an external system. We put that in its own bounded context. That's an option. We can actually say optimize for future potential. Well, we maybe want to do something with price calculations in the future. We want to do dynamic pricing. Let's put this part in its own bounded context. Maybe how would it happen on paper? And we come to this situation, right? So try to experiment with what bounded context would work for your company in your context. This is the domain modeling, right? A lot of talks have gone into this domain modeling. After this, you want to do something called domain message flow modeling to see how does this play out in certain use cases. A lot of YouTube videos already go into that. So, but this is a basic 101 on how do we design bounded context. Then we can fill this into a bounded context canvas from the DDD crew, and to clearly see what are the boundaries of our bounded context. And then we can use that, what we've done so far, with domain-driven design is focus on the strategic patterns, right? The models and teams have relationship which assess overview with DDD strategic patterns. So if you look at domain-driven design, people usually talk about strategic patterns and tactical patterns, or strategic design and tactical design. What we've now did mostly was strategic design with some ubiquitous language, bounded context. We didn't go into this part yet. We didn't go into core and generic yet, but we used this one. Now we got our bounded context. We can use the tactical design to do some model-driven design and create these bounded contexts in code. Those are the tactical patterns. What you need to do in order to successfully use these tactical patterns is have a correct bounded context, or correct bounded context, at least, because they're never perfect, right? At least took some time to design the bounded context, to design a need, because then we can actually start talking about aggregates or entities. Maybe you don't need aggregates. It's not a given that you need aggregates, right? So the tactical patterns are there to make sure that whenever your need changes, or whenever your model changes, your code can change quite easily with it. Most of the people online talk about tactical patterns and aggregates and say we're doing domain-driven design. No, domain-driven design is really about understanding the problem and creating relevant models out of that, right? Let it design your problem. But the real three patterns of DDD is collaborative modeling, strategic design, and strategic patterns. So this should be design, by the way. So this is design. And those are the three pillars of domain-driven design. We use collaborative modeling to design, to domain model out these patterns. And that's what domain-driven design is a discipline rooted in the belief that creating good software system for problems in a complex domain cannot be done without a deep understanding of the business problem you're trying to solve, right? So you need a deep understanding of the business problem you're trying to solve, the real business problem, right? Not the already solved business problem by user designers or architects. So we share context, meaning, and categorize business needs through collaborative modeling. Through that, we design a language and model to solve complex business problem, right? So we design that bounded context to solve it in. And from that, we create code. And it has some set of principles. You can read this up later on, right? In order to create that, there needs to be deep shared understanding. To improve the understanding, the stakeholder needs to communicate with each other in a language. That's a ubiquitous language. So here you see the ubiquitous language. The shared understanding is expressed in the model. That's the bounded context with its ubiquitous language. The system has explicit boundaries, and stakeholders should continuously improve their understanding and refactor the model towards a deeper insight. Usually people design a model and they stick with that model. No, we need to constantly update that model. That's why we use the tactical patterns. The tactical patterns are there so we can refactor the model towards deeper insight from code, but also from a domain collaborative modeling perspective, right? Important note, this is great stuff from Matthias. Domain-driven design present an all-encompassing view on software design. It's from a micro level to the higher level, but you don't apply DDD everywhere. If it's a more supporting or simplistic problem you're solving, you might not need the tactical patterns that far, right? So don't do that. It's not prescriptive. DDD doesn't have rules. It's open to new interpretation, like event storming, domain storytelling are all things that didn't exist with the book. Even a domain event did not exist while the book was written. Eric Evans is very specific about this. DDD should continue to evolve. The goal is shared business understanding, create software out of that, right? So he gave a talk about AI. He's experimented with the AIs because in essence, AIs are also models to solve business problems. So right? It's evolving. It's not a static thing. There's no versioning. There's no, this is how you do it. No, as long as you abide by that goal, you're actually doing domain-driven design. Now, you might be wondering where to start. Go to the DDD crew. There's this domain-driven design starter modeling process for doing it inside a domain or a company. Then you have the model exploration whirlpool. That's more focused on the team level. On a DDD crew, it's more specified how you do that approach. I gave you one approach today. Try to experiment with that. It's a complex endeavor. And yeah, I'm writing a book about this with my friends, Keen and Evelyn. It's soon to be out. I hope within the next 1.5 months. It goes to production soon. And that's it. And I think I'm 1 minute over 9, so I took an hour, but you can get the book here. And these are my lovely cats. I need to always give my cats some famous thanks. And let's see if people have some questions. It was a whirlwind, I guess, right?
Thank you very
Hope it
much.
was not a lot, but
thank you very much for your very let's throw you right in the pool and learn all the things. That was really, really interesting. I learned a lot. Thank you very much, Kenny, for that. I think
one thing I want to add, right? And this is a lot of theory. When I give workshops, this will take a whole day, and we do a lot of domain modeling. Do domain modeling, do collaborative modeling. That's the essence. DDD is not a theoretical thing. It's meant to be collaborative. We didn't do it today to give you some theory in an hour because that will take 2-3 hours, but try to start event storming or domain storytelling. Just do it. That's the essence of DDD. Very pragmatic, very hands-on.
That's awesome. I wonder if anyone that is in here in the Zoom call, what are your questions? I have questions to ask, of course, but I kind of want to open it to everyone. I know it can be a little bit intimidating, but also this is your chance to, try to get some of the questions that you might have collected while Kenny was talking. I think some of the ones that are kind of from me, and I'm trying to just give people a chance to just put up their videos and ask the question if that's how you want to do it.
You can also write in chat, right, if you want. So you can open the mic, but you can also write in chat.
Yes.
YouTube streamers could do that as well.
Yeah, in fact, I will check there just in a sec. By the way, I love the fact that you put the cats there.
Yeah, if I don't, I get punished, right, by them.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah, that always happens. Right. So just maybe people are warming up on the questions. I wonder if you can tell me a little bit more about your experience on doing these event storming sessions on teams that are kind of new to domain-driven design and might be trying to find the boundaries of a system in a kind of convoluted place, because it seems like people would be maybe a bit like, I'm sure that in any group they would be like, yes, let's do this thing to get out of the problems that we're in, and some more people would be like concerned, scared, basically on the addressing people's emotions and to get them to collaborate, but also on the how do you get to bridge the gap and get them working with you, and that they are able to get the knowledge into the shared pool of knowledge.
Collaborative modeling actually helps there, because let's say you have a disagreement, and especially in software, we can have a lot of heated debates on what's better, right? But usually it's against each other. As soon as we start to model it with event storming on paper, it's not about you and me anymore, but you can start asking questions towards the model. Especially when you're in a physical space together, right? It's not towards you. So let's say I'm doing something here, right? If I do it towards the person, now conflict might start brewing, because people might think, oh, are you against me now? Or if I turn to my whiteboard and we say, oh, do you mean this or that? That can already lower it, right? I'm not saying it solves it, because it's complex. People are complex. I always make the joke, collaborative modeling is a lot easier when you do it alone. By the way, do so. Try to do event storming by yourself. There's this thing called a secret modeler. So try to do it for yourself. New tools. I always try to experiment myself first with an example I have. Soon I will do narrative-driven development with Sam together. Because we're having a lot of discussion, but I need to try it. I need to see, how does it feel? How does it relate to the other one? How can I, when I do it with stakeholders or when I do it with my team, I can prepare which questions will pop up, which challenges I see, right? So do it for yourself. It's called the secret modeler, actually. It's from Ben Monsois. He calls it the secret modeler in Wordly mapping, right? He starts to model while having conversation without you knowing, which is great. But do it for yourself. Try to model it out yourself first.
That's a
and
that's a
then,
great idea. I like that
yeah,
very much.
yeah,
There is
and,
a question incoming here.
yeah.
The question is, and I'm just going to read it out so that um, you can focus on listening, I guess. And it seems to me that Scrum and DDD are incompatible. If you start with stories before you have done full DDD modeling, as you said, I get stories are problem space, but if you put
As you
them in
said,
the
yes.
sprint, you are already in the solution space. Is that your question, Darko?
Yeah. So it seems to be, yeah, that are incompatible to me. Yet nobody seems to be addressing this issue.
Yeah. Well, they don't have to be incompatible because I've done it in Scrum. The thing is, how do people implement Scrum? I actually gave a talk the day before yesterday at a team topology, and I used this slide. Give me a second. I'll share this slide. This is a slide by John Cutler. Here we go. Do you see the slide? And I really
Yeah.
love, because we're talking about we're talking about boundaries. We also have team boundaries. Most teams I see are roughly here. Most Scrum teams are here, right? Agile, able to release, but they don't design together. They don't do requirements planning together, and they don't do opportunities selection together. Domain-driven design shines the most when you're here. Team topology shines the most when you're here. Teams overall shines the most when they have full autonomy, right? Which is this part. I really believe that you want to be here. If you're here, yes, you probably get, because handover 1, handover 2, handover 3, by here you get user stories that are already in, right? That are already here somewhere. And domain-driven design can still work. What I usually do, if you get this in a user story or a refinement, I start to do collaborative modeling during that refinement. And then questions pop up. And then two things can happen. Either they become very mad at you because you're like, why are you asking this question? We already thought about this, and start implementing, right? I'm not sure if you recognize that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's clear, right? If they do that, just don't go any further. Usually I then afterwards start designing it further myself with the team. Start coming up with a solution, make assumptions during collaborative modeling. So I use EventStorming myself, and to make assumptions, because in essence, a bounded context is by default already a model and already an abstraction. So we make assumptions to do that. The problem is you cannot design the language together with your stakeholders because they don't allow you to, right? So that's why, yes, DDD seems a bit incompatible, but you can do some stuff there. I then at least create a bounded context for my team, right? And then the words that are used, I try to nudge them during my conversation with the stakeholder. And I try to model it out myself, come with a software design that of course favors myself, and then I come back with questions and I say, well, we will implement this design. This is based on these assumptions and these questions. If you don't reply back to me or do anything to me, we're going to implement it this way, right? At least you're clear and you made a contract with these people. That's how I need to play the game if I'm in one of these teams over here. Right? I'm very much make it explicit what I'm going to do, what assumptions I make, and what questions I have. So I do collaborative modeling by myself in my team. Right? But Scrum can be used here as well, by the way. Usually when you're over here, Scrum becomes a bit more, how do you say it, not needed anymore. But that's a whole different story. But I hope I answered your question and give you some pointers how
Well,
you
yeah.
can.
Can we have that slide? That's quite a good slide.
Yeah, it's from Journey to Product Teams. I will share the link in the link to the blog post. It's in the chat now.
Thanks.
There's another question, by the way. And this is a question from Nick Clark. And he's asking about if there's a large system, but there's multiple teams and stakeholders trying to work in the same bounded context, and the boundaries and language are messy, what are techniques that can help evolve this to an architecture with one team per bounded context?
So that's a very hard question. You cannot solve this very quickly because I'm also in favor of always try to build something that gives value to your business. I usually start doing big picture event storming. From big picture event storming, start to emerge bounded context or subdomains. Then I can plot that on the current system. And then I can see, okay, if I now know where I want it roughly to be, because it's still emerging, right? You're not sure, but over analyzing that doesn't give you any value. But at least I have some first boundaries that I can work with. And I say, well, I have one big ball of mud now in my monolith. I've done this before. By the way, the book by Architectural Modernization by Nick Tune, my previous client wrote a piece on that, how I actually explained this. And I gave a talk about this. I do big picture event stormings, try to explore how I want it to be. So how I want the bounded context to be. And then find something on the roadmap to move today towards that. Pick one team, one bounded context, and split that out. That will create new business value. That will then there you can experiment with domain-driven design. And then slowly start bringing in more team, get more out, but it requires really deliberate and explicit architecture, and it requires a lot of teams to agree on that. So yeah, you need a strong software architect enabler to do this, but that's the basic approach. Find the bounded context that you want it to be, and then slowly move towards it step by step. And while you do that, change that future state, because it will change because you come up with new insights. I hope that answers the question.
I was kind of just waiting to see if we heard. Yeah, Nick said that it was useful. So there's a new question from EventStorming. Should teams working on separate contexts work together to define core concepts that can be shared, especially when language align in meaning? Should teams embrace it versus try to explain same concepts using different language and stay independent in that definition?
Yeah, so I had this in my current client as well, that there might be some definitions that might be the same. Yes, definitely try to align on things that are very clear, and it also really depends on the domain you're in, right? If you're in the, I can imagine if you're in the, I've worked, I think I worked in the surveying world, so like the social sciences, and things in sciences are very clearly defined, right? So certain concepts are very clear. Also, other domains like I think medicine have very clear common concepts that they defined. Use these, and these can be used in several contexts as well, as is. Because the domain itself already has them clearly defined, and they already are connected with each other. So it's definitely the same concept, but be careful with it. There's something called connaissance. So you have coupling and you have connaissance. Connaissance of naming is what we're worried about the most. If a concept in one bounded context is the same as in the other bounded context, you have a connaissance of naming, and by default you're coupled. You cannot change that name now anymore. If your model tries to evolve in something new and that name needs to change, you're now being held back by that. So be very careful about these concepts that are the same. Are they really the same or not? we try to lower that connaissance as much as possible. And Vladik is actually having writing a good book about this coupling and connaissance. I hope that answers the question.
That question.
I think that's what's useful. Thank you.
Awesome. I actually have a follow-on for this question that Nick had. On the when you answered that in this complicated domain with multiple teams and one bounded context. I kind of was thinking, would you not also, I think event sourcing would be good, but I think in situations like that, one thing that there's generally lacking is a good feedback loop for finding, basically you have the EventStorming workshop, and then as someone inside the system or even someone observing, you kind of want to set up this points for feedback, right? And I think that's that's something that you kind of have to intuit. And sometimes I find that wordly mapping helps people consider those things, which is a practice that is a little bit hard to develop. Is that your experience too?
Yeah, I use user needs mapping a lot nowadays, which only goes into the first part of wordly mapping and tries to put teams on top. It's by Rich Allen from Team Topologies. I worked a lot with Rich. And for me, user needs mapping goes into I can actually show you one.
That would be great. I guess if you do, the first thing is when you say, oh, I need to do this, and you cannot do the little tree, right?
Here you go. This is a user needs map. It's a made up example, by the way, so it's not a real example. What we do here is we say we have a takeout customer. That takeout customer has some sort of flow. So the flow is select products for home delivery, no delivery time, make an order for home delivery, and pay for home delivery. Then we go down into the value chain, which is the wordly mapping stuff, right? We have user needs. These are not really needs, they're activities, but I'm being deliberately ambiguous about that because I want to see, okay, the needs that are here, where did we deliver them into which system, and where all the way down, what's in the chain that we need to solve this, right? And now you can see, oh, we have a payment module that's here in the home deliveries team, and we also have a payment team. Oh, this is a bit quirky that this, right, that this is happening. Yeah. So there's a payment module in the home deliveries that's not being built by the payment team. Is that correct?
Yeah, that looks weird. But that's kind of what I like about the wordly mapping experience, that you kind of start thinking about, why is this here? And then you also think, how is this going to go? Like you have some payment system and you're like, oh, we're using, payment friend system, some friends that has a payment system that is not totally there. They're like, how is this going to go? What happens if they fall? And you can do that for your own teams and projects.
Yeah. So there's two ways I run this. It's either a big picture event storming, and from that I will create these maps, or I go to the teams and start creating these maps with the teams. I'll just ask them what process is your software actually solving, and what chain is it needed, and what's the teams involved, right? And exactly what you say, and this is the best conversation. It's a bit harder. You need some experience with them, but in the end, if you run this a lot, it becomes quite easier and you get a lot of questions. And then you can actually see, this payment module, well, maybe, right, we want to start doing this.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like it gives you some visual model to kind of track. Yeah, it's a certain conversation.
So yeah, it's a map. It's just like going on holiday. It's a map. Oh, let's go. Maybe we can go there and there and there. Oh, there is a castle. Oh, I'm going to Scotland again next year. So, oh, there's a castle. What's in the castle? Is this interesting? So you need to go deeper afterwards. But it's a good map to start your journey. Yeah,
absolutely. Castles in Scotland. There is a great question in here from Luke they are asking, by the way, look, feel free to jump in and talk. Like this format is, the whole point is to enable people to jump, but we know that can be a bit scary.
If you want, right?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, go for it.
Hi, how you going?
Hi.
Thanks for the talk. It was great. Yeah, on my team, I've got a bunch of people that are brand new to DDD in general, and so I was wondering, like, what are your recommendations for the best way to introduce them? Like, should we get them like to read some books, like watch video, like learn the basics first, or should we jump straight into some of the modeling exercises as a soft introduction, or something else? How do you start off engineers that are brand new to the concept? It's
question. I try to get the basics in first, and that's the concept of the model I talked about today, right? Why are we building domain models, and what are domain models, and especially I try to get that paradigm shift in, right? I've worked with Ruby on Rails developers in my last client. They were very good engineers, but Ruby on Rails is like one huge model, right? So then I started introducing first the concept of a domain model for a specific purpose, and what pain does it solve in their current architecture, right? I tried to find the pain. And the pain was really they were getting in each other's way, right? Conflicting user, conflicting business rules. Like if I change a business rule here, oh, then this will go down because they're conflicting. I tried to focus on that. Oh, but now we have a bounded context pattern. We try to split those two up in two different models. And if they would use twice Ruby on Rails and they don't use any tactical patterns, I'm quite fine with that. At least I have boundaries, right? So I start really simple with explaining the paradigm shift of domain models to the teams and explain that through event storming. But I never try to do event storming with stakeholders. I try to do them with them, try to get their understanding of the business out first so that they can learn in a safe environment, right? Yeah, because if you start to involve stakeholders, they will have questions and they will have opinions about what's this engineer and what are we doing. So try to do it within your team in a safe zone as well, so you can safely learn about, okay, yeah, what's the bounded context? How would that look for our application? And the most important part there is safe experimentation. It should be able to fail. That's important. We took a not too complex domain model to start implementing so that it can fail.
One really cool trick for this that has actually gotten people asking me about, well, what is this domain-driven design thing? Even before I mentioned it, is getting them to model their systems together. And in a way, that's kind of how Bytesize was born. If you've never heard of this, Bytesize architecture sessions is a thing that exists. And it can be really useful for, in a team, you ask people to kind of diagram their own systems, and then they start diagramming it. And instead of you telling them, they kind of are like, oh, actually, what is this called? Why do we have this name? Like the questions come to them rather than you put the questions to them. And that means, well, there's a higher engagement of, they are trying to fix this problem and they have the problem of modeling something. And also you give it in like small incremental ways.
Yeah, then you can get the problem out as well. I love bite-sized architecture. I get the link as well. These are just 1.5 hour sessions. I did event storming once for 2.5 hours, and some people find that, can we just start coding now again? So bite-size are it's a collaborative modeling tool as well, bite-size. So yeah.
Yep.
It's great. Thank you. Thanks for the link and finding the pain as well is I think that would be what are the pain points they're currently having that changing the approach might help. It's really good. Thank you.
Most welcome, and thank you for coming on the screen. And it's not just me going like, hi, I'm just here trying to get people to talk. Is there also Kenny? They're asking if you could share your presentation.
Yeah, I'm gonna share it online afterwards. I'm gonna make an extract and share it.
We'll push
it
it
on
to
the website.
LinkedIn and the website as well, Virtual DDD.
Yeah, I'll add it to the website as well. So that will be fine.
Perfect. Okay, the next one. Do we have any other questions or comments, or anything like that?
I think that's it, right?
I think that might be it. We've got a couple of really nice thank yous. Like Michael said, that they like this, how we present this, or how we made it happen. Obviously, all kudos to you, Kenny, and for doing all the hard work. So thank you very much.
Thanks to you as well for organizing this in your evening.
And your morning. Yeah, I think I love it that we enable people in both kind of opposite sides of the globe.
The whole idea of virtual DDD. So we should do that more often. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Good.
Well, if nobody else has anything else to ask, we're gonna end it here. I'm gonna attempt to stop this